When I was working with the teens out in Washington State, when I lived out there several years ago, I did a project with them. It was an object lesson, I guess is what you would call it. The kids came in one Sunday morning, and I had a pile of blocks stacked up in the middle of the floor. And after they got seated, I told them, I made them this offer. I said, if any of you can stack these blocks from floor to ceiling without the blocks falling over, and it has to touch the ceiling, I'll give you $20. But if you can't get it all the way to the ceiling, then you have to give me $1. And I knew before I even got into class that morning who was going to take it. There was this young, cocky little boy named Brian in my class. No relation to the Brian here. Not even the same attitude. But anyway, I knew immediately, as soon as I made that offer, Brian would jump up. And he did. He jumped up and he said, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it. And so he starts stacking blocks. And he's very meticulous. He takes the bigger blocks and he lays them down, and he gets a really good foundation going, and he finally gets to the last block, and he's about a foot short. And he says, oh man, and so he tears it down. Well, now instead of laying the blocks flat, he stands them up so that he's got the extra room, but he doesn't have quite the same foundation. And so the blocks fell a few times, and he really had to balance it, but he's stacking the blocks, making sure that he gets all of the height that he can, and he gets done, and he's about an inch short. And he kind of lets out this scream, and he's looking around for another block, and of course there aren't any other blocks, and he is kind of frustrated, and I looked at him and I said, you owe me $1, Brian. And he said, this isn't fair. You knew the blocks weren't going to reach all the way to the top. I said, sit down. I had everybody open their Bibles, and I want you to do this with me this morning to Luke chapter 14. It's on page 739 in your pew Bible. Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 28. And I want you to read this with me. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king, will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. Now, a few weeks ago, I preached a sermon titled, No Mediocrity Allowed, talking about the seriousness of one's commitment to following Jesus and obeying God. And I talked about how I think sometimes we water down Christianity, trying to make it a simple, easy, comfortable path for people to follow. But Jesus takes a very different approach. He warns people that following Him will not be comfortable. It will not always be easy. And He says that we must consider the cost. Now, He doesn't do this to scare people away, but He wants to make sure that people aren't disillusioned about Christianity and what it means to follow Him. He wants them to know that following Him will not be like anything else they've ever really experienced, never really understood, never really even contemplated. And so this morning we're going to look at 4 different responses that people give when they are confronted with Jesus and the challenge to follow Him. And so I want you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 8, verse 18, which is where Randy read from earlier. Page 686 is where we're going to start this morning. Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 18, page 686. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross the lake to the other side, or cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." I thought Randy was just going to preach the sermon for me this morning when he took off there, but this man was very typical. When a student wanted to follow a certain teacher or a certain rabbi, he would go up and he would invite himself to follow that man. That was their equivalent of our application to a graduate school or graduate program. You go and apply, and this teacher will either take you under their wing or not. And there's no indication in the story that the guy had any false motives in wanting to follow Jesus. But it's in Jesus' response that we may get some insight into what this man was really after. You see, back in those days, teachers, especially good teachers, usually were pretty well taken care of. They were very highly esteemed within their society. They would usually benefit greatly. People would give them money and pay them. And so they wore the nice robes, and they probably lived in nice homes. And, things were pretty good. It would be kind of like a college professor or, a big, well-known speaker. And so people would follow them, these rabbis, hoping that maybe they could get to that same level too and have the nice robes and the nice house and the nice this and the nice that. And it sounds from Jesus' response that that's what this man was after. I want to be one of those big-name speakers, big-name teachers. I want to be one of those big-name preachers that has the big house and the big cars and all this kind of stuff. And that's evidently what this young man was after. Jesus' answer is quite offsetting to this young man. Because Jesus' answer, as one of the authors that I read this week put it, it says it is calculated to dispel all faulty notions that following him means a leisurely involvement and little or no personal hardship or self-denial. See, Jesus makes it clear that in following him, there's no guarantees that even the basic comforts are going to be available. This guy may have thought, well, if I'm hanging out with this guy, I'll get all of the benefits that he's got. And Jesus says, the benefits that I've got, or is there no guarantees? Maybe not even a place to lay my head. Now, we don't know this young man's response. It doesn't tell us whether he decided to follow Jesus or not. But the way the story's written kind of leaves you with this taste in your mouth that he probably didn't follow Jesus. And so I put this in a category of, I want to follow, but not if it means losing all of my material security. I'm willing to follow Jesus, but I need to know that I'm going to have a roof over my head. I need to know that I'm going to have clothes on my back. I need to know that I'm going to make enough money to be able to support myself and my family. I just wonder if there might be some in this category here this morning. But we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Now I want you to read with me verse 21 and 22. Another man, one of his disciples, said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead." Now I have heard this sermon or this text preached from many, many different perspectives. I've heard people say, well, the guy's father hadn't really died. Because after all, in the Jewish mindset, for a young man to bury their parents was a very sacred thing. I mean, it was something that was very highly expected. And so people always want to soften this and say, well, the father hadn't really died. What the man is asking basically is, can I go be with my father while he is dying, and then when he's dead, we'll bury him, and then I'll come back and follow him. Another way I've heard it explained is that the man wanted to go bury his father and then take the 7-week mourning period or 7-day mourning period, depending on which commentaries you read. And so in either one of these, if you understand it that way, it softens it, because Jesus isn't saying, no, don't go bury your father. What he's saying is, don't spend that last part of his life there. You can go do the ritual of burial, but otherwise I come first. Or Jesus is saying, no, you can't do the mourning period afterwards. You can go do the burial, but you can't do that part because I come before that. But neither of those is what the text says. What the text says is, let the dead bury their own dead. You come follow me. And this sounds very harsh, but it's very consistent with what Jesus has taught throughout the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. Because all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, you have heard that it was said to do this, but I say to you, do this. You have heard that it was said that it is very important for you to be there to bury your parents, but I say to you, the most important thing is for you to follow me before all other important things. Again, we don't read about whether or not this young man followed him. But again, the way that the story is told, it seems as if he probably didn't. And I put this in the category of, I want to follow, but I've got other important things to do first. And I know that there are times when we all will struggle with this one, where we put Jesus off because we've got other important things we've got to do. Got to go to work. Got to earn some money. Got to take care of my family. Got to provide for my future. And that's a very important thing, right? Okay, anybody awake this morning here? Okay, is it important to go to work and provide? Yeah, thank you. It is. Amen. There we go. But is that more important than following Jesus? That's the difference. Our kids getting all their sporting activities. Because after all, if they don't make every sporting activity there is when they're 6 or 7 years old, they're never going to make it to the major leagues, are they? They're not going to get that full ride scholarship unless we have them in every single sporting activity there is. And I'm not talking about just every baseball game, but they're in baseball games, soccer games, hockey games, basketball games, tennis matches. I mean, you got to have them in everything so that you discover where their talent is, because after all, that's what's going to provide for them, right? Yeah. Anyway. But that doesn't come before Jesus. I think what happens a lot of times is we start thinking that all of these important things in our life, all these things that we have to do, is really what takes care of us. And we find ourselves in this next category that we're going to look at. Now, I've just taken off and I've totally got off of where I was on my paper here, so let me get back so that we don't stay here for 2 more hours. Read with me these next verses, beginning in verse 23. Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, and so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. And the disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. And he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it became completely calm. And the men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. There are a lot of similarities between this story and the story of Jonah. If you remember the story of Jonah, God calls Jonah a prophet and tells him he's got to go to Nineveh. But Jonah doesn't want to go to Nineveh and preach. Jonah he doesn't care at all about those Ninevites. Just let God wipe them out. So he doesn't want to go there and preach. So he gets on a boat and sails in the opposite direction. God causes a storm to come up, and everybody on the boat is panicked except for Jonah, who's asleep. The men come to Jonah and they wake him up and they say, "You got to pray to your God or we're all going to drown." And Jonah says, "No, I'm the cause of the problem. You guys throw me overboard and the storm will go away." And so they did, and it did, and everything, you remember how that story worked. He ended up in Nineveh by way of a big fish. Okay? So now here is Jesus, and he calls his disciples to follow him. Where are they going? He said, we're going to get in a boat, we're going to go to the other side of the lake. What's on the other side of the lake? The land of the Gerasenes or Gadarenes, or there's a bunch of different translations of the word there, but it's the land of the Gadarenes. That's a Gentile region. Jews don't go to Gentile regions. And so I wonder if there wasn't a little hesitancy on the side of the disciples that, okay, we're going to follow you, Jesus. We'll follow you wherever you go. And then he says, okay, get in the boat. We're going to the Gadarenes. And they said, not only that, but they're in land in a cemetery. Jews don't go into cemeteries, especially not Gentile cemeteries. Not only that, guess what they raise in Gentile lands? Pigs. Jews don't like pigs. When we moved from Seattle to Texas one time, the guy that drove our moving truck, they got there early one morning. I was going to be real nice, and so I went over to the Hardee's or Arby's or Burger King or whatever it was next to us and bought breakfast for everyone. So I bought him a bacon, egg, and cheese omelet thing, and realized real quick he was Jewish. And he took serious offense to me trying to poison him by getting him to eat a pig. But anyway, so here are these guys, and they're going off and they know where they're going, and so there's this doubt in them. But yet they stayed on the boat. Even when they got on and Jesus said, okay, we're going over there, they didn't say, oh, I can't go there. They stayed on the boat with him. Well, then this storm comes up. Everybody's panicked except the one guy who's asleep. They go to him, but this time they don't say, get up and pray to your God so we'll be saved. They say, will you save us? How they knew that Jesus could do something that would save them. Evidently, they had seen him do amazing things before, like heal a leper, heal a centurion's servant from a distance, heal Peter's mother-in-law with a touch of his hand. So they go to him and they wake him up. Save us, save us. This story doesn't just tell us about the power of Jesus, even though that is there and that's one of the main emphasis of the story, but it also reveals the lack of faith that the disciples had. And so I put that in this category, which says, I want to follow, but I don't really trust everything yet. There's still parts about this that I don't understand. And that's not a bad place to be. Because that's where most of us start. Is where we say, you know what, I believe in this Jesus guy enough that I'm going to get in the boat with him and I'm going to start following him. But boy, there's a lot about him that I don't understand. But the longer we stay in that boat with him and the longer we continue to be around him and watch him work and read his stories and listen to his voice and listen to his word, the more we do understand and the more confidence and the more faith we will have. The rest of the Gospel of Matthew continues to show how these men who started at this point continue to grow in their faith and grow in their understanding and grow from the point of saying, what kind of man is this, to saying, this is the Son of God. And so that's not a bad place, a bad response to get to at some point in time, but there's one other response that I want us to see that wraps up this chapter, beginning in verse 28. When he arrived at the other side of the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass away. Now, you've got to keep this in mind. Jesus is leading this group of disciples who they're just really not quite sure exactly what's going on here. And he leads them onto Gentile soil near a Gentile cemetery. And they're met by 2 demon-possessed men with a herd of pigs over here to the side. You realize that these disciples must have been just, what on earth did we get ourselves into? So the 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him, and they were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." He said to them, "Go." So they came out and they went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off, went into the town, and reported all of this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And then the whole town went out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. You know, this is not the typical place where a typical Jewish rabbi would be. And this story, I think, makes that very clear. And you begin to understand that following Jesus is not going to be a typical following of anyone else. You're going to be led to go places that you're not comfortable, to do things you're not comfortable, to be confronted by people you're not comfortable with. You need to count the costs. It's also interesting in this story that the disciples are asking, "What kind of man is this?" And the demons are saying, "Jesus, you are the Son of God." Which, just as a little side note here, it helps us to understand, you know, church, Jesus is the Son of God, whether men accept it or believe it or not. And that's just the truth. And it's a great thing that most of us here have decided to step into that boat and acknowledge the fact that, yes, He is the Son of God. But not everybody responds that way when they see Jesus. In fact, I want us to look at the response of the people from this town. They pleaded with Him to leave their region. Now, I don't know, was it because they were upset that He killed all their pigs? I don't know. Was it that they were afraid of a guy that was this powerful? I don't know. You know, last night, to prepare for the class that I tried to do with the teens, they're doing this thing where they watch movies and pick out biblical themes and biblical lessons out of these movies. And so I told Daniel I would fill in for him, and I told Lori last night we have to watch The Avengers last night. She said, "I've already seen it." And I said, "Yeah, but babe, I have to watch it." She doesn't like watching movies that we've already seen, and I love watching movies. Like I could watch The Avengers over and over again, but there's one scene in it where the Incredible Hulk falls out of the sky, like, you know, a mile up in the air or whatever, and he crashes through this building, and you see him wake up, and there's this old security guard guy looking over him. And, you know, typically you would think if you saw a big green man fall out of the sky, crash through a building, and then shrink back into a real human being kind of person, would that freak you out just a little bit? Yeah. Yeah, it would me. And I mean, I'm talking real life, not if you went to the movies and saw it, but yeah, it would kind of freak you out. But in this movie, this old security guy is asking him all these questions, you know, and he says, "Are you an alien?" And he says, "No, I'm not an alien." And he said, "Well, you fell out of the sky and you were big and green and stuff." Then he throws him some clothes. He says, "Yeah, you were butt naked and fell from the sky." And he throws him some clothes, and he said, "I had to wait till you shrunk down to a normal guy before you could fit into these." But, you know, he just acted like it was no big deal that this big green man fell out of the sky. And I have absolutely no... Okay, now I remember where I was going with that. These people, they come out of the city and they've just seen this guy cast demons into a herd of pigs. Maybe they're just freaking out because somebody with that much power is in their midst and they don't know what else he's capable of doing. Not only that, but he's a Jew. And he's in Gentile territory, and would you want your enemy with that much power in your land? I don't know why they drove him out. We would think that automatically they would just fall down and worship him and say, man, we want somebody with this kind of power around here, but they didn't. What's interesting, their response, and I'll go ahead and put this up there, is we don't want anything to do with you. They ask him to leave. Now, you would think that Jesus would stand there and say, but wait, let me explain. Let me show you what I can give to you. What's interesting is Jesus doesn't seem to argue with them or anything. The very next thing it says, and he got back on the boat and he sailed back across to his own hometown. The response of some people is, don't want anything to do with you. I know, I've seen the stuff he does. I've heard the stories, but I don't want anything to do with it. Jesus doesn't beat him over the head. He doesn't condemn them. He doesn't brush the dust off his feet. It's almost like he is patiently going to wait, knowing that they may come back. So now, these are the 4 common responses. And I want this morning to look at these. We're going to go back to them in reverse order, because I think that is kind of a roadmap for our own faith. You see, first of all, we must not turn Jesus away. And I know there are people, and there may even be people here this morning who have just said, I've heard the stories, I've seen the examples, but I just don't want him in my life right now. And if that's where you are this morning, I want to tell you, if you tell him to get out of your life, he will. But that's not to say that he doesn't still want to be in your life. But before you just reject him totally, I want you to consider what you are losing if you do turn away from him. As Randy brought up this morning, he is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. And so the first step we must take is saying, you know what, I don't understand everything, but I'm going to follow him. I'm going to follow him even though I don't have all the answers, even though there's parts of this Jesus thing that I don't understand, even though I don't even know exactly how this is going to impact my life and what I'm going to have to change, but I am going to follow him. That's when we get into the boat. We say, what kind of man is this? But we're in the boat. And then we stay in that boat longer and we get to know more about him, and that leads us to a place in our faith where we actually begin to put him above everything else in our life, even the most important things. He does come before our job. He does come before our kids. He does come before everything else in our life because we know that he is the one able to provide for us. I can't secure my future. Not ultimately. Do you know what's going to happen to Lance one day? I'm going to die. And you know what's going to happen to my bank account one day? It's going to be empty. That's just the way it is. And I got news for you. It's going to happen to you too. But my salvation is guaranteed. My eternal life is guaranteed. And therefore, the longer I'm in the boat with Jesus, the more I'm able to trust him and put him ahead of all of my important stuff, because I know that he is going to be able to provide everything I need. And it may not be a house and the clothes. Well, I know he wants me to wear clothes, but it may not be a house or food and all of those things. In fact, Jesus is real specific about this one. Turn back real quick into chapter 6. Chapter 6, beginning in verse 25. Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet their heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow? They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. And if that is how God clothes the grasses of the field, which are here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows you need them. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So we begin by getting into the boat. Even though we don't understand everything, we grow to the point where we put Him above even the important things in our life. Then we get to where we trust Him totally with everything. And we don't worry about things. So I want to ask you this morning, where do you place yourself on this scale? Are you down here at the bottom of the, I don't want you around? Or are you up where you're saying, I'm staying in the boat, but I don't know all there is to know yet? Maybe you're at the point where you say, Jesus really is more important than everything else. Or ultimately, where we want to get to is where I trust Him completely to provide for everything, having no worries or concerns about this life of my own. The important thing is that we're moving. The important thing is that we're continually walking, following Him wherever He leads. So where are you this morning? If you are here this morning, I challenge you, I urge you, I plead with you to get into the boat. To take that step and say, yep, I don't understand all of it, but I do believe there's something about Jesus that I need in my life. Maybe you're here and you know there are things that you need to quit putting before Jesus. Maybe you need to just totally surrender and say, I trust Him with everything. And we're going to stand and we're going to sing a song. And while we do that, I want to encourage you, if you need to move from one of these phases to the other this morning, whatever you need to do, come down to the front. We'll talk about it. We'll figure out a way to make it happen. And we'll continue to move to where Jesus wants us to be. So whatever you need this morning, please come forward while we stand and sing this.